The film unfurls in the boundary city of Nogales, Mexico, where Brian, a tough man living alone in a shoddy camper-like house, gets a frightful bad dream of his spouse being ruthlessly gone after by a gathering of men. To get away from these torturing dreams, Brian hurls himself entirely into the discipline of combative techniques, committing his days to thorough preparation. In the meantime, a young fellow named Oscar, who lives in the same area, notices Brian's hand-to-hand fighting meetings from a good ways. Oscar is profoundly motivated by Brian's ability and yearns to gain proficiency with the specialty of battling. Oscar's everyday schedule includes watching Brian's preparation prior to heading off to school. As the day advances, Oscar winds up followed by a gathering of hooligans in a vehicle. Naturally, he faculties risk and endeavors to dodge them, looking for shelter behind a left vehicle on the side of the road, much to his dismay that Brian is quietly noticing his experience and discovered that Oscar's assurance to secure combative techniques abilities is driven by an urgent requirement for self-protection around evening time. Similar hooligans appear at Oscar's home, going up against him at gunpoint. It's uncovered that they're part of Oscar's hoodlum sibling Hector's team and frequently blackmail cash from Oscar. In spite of being guiltless, Oscar goes along and surrenders his cash without obstruction. The next morning, Oscar gets back to the preparation field, searching for Brian. Amazingly, Brian approaches him and welcomes Oscar to join his preparation. Excited, Oscar starts gaining cautious moves from Brian. He commits himself to preparing, acquiring certainty and working on his abilities over 2 or 3 weeks. Oscar's feeling of dread toward Hector's gangsters lessens, and he faces them in the following scene. Oscar requests that Brian set up an underground battle to test his freshly discovered capacities. Anyway, Brian denies, underscoring that the abilities he showed Oscar are intended for self-preservation, not proficient battles. Hearing this, Oscar ends up being furious and stomps out of the spot outside the preparing office. Oscar is shocked at the point when he recognizes his more established sibling Hector. What's more, his gathering of companions sitting tight for him. Excited to see his sibling again, Oscar approaches Hector with a warm hug. As they participate in discussion, Brian shows up on the scene, and Hector, detecting a new presence, becomes dubious. He questions Oscar about Brian, contemplating whether he's a regulation authorization official. In answer, Oscar consoles his sibling, making sense of that Brian is his blemish Merrill expressions educator and represents no danger. Hector, a criminal who has consistently trusted Oscar would join his crimes, communicates his craving for his more youthful sibling to turn into a section of his reality. Anyway, Oscar stands up to needing to carry on with a typical existence and remain away from the criminal hidden world. In spite of their varying ways, Hector welcomes Oscar to commend his return with a party. At first reluctant, Oscar ultimately concurs and gets into Hector's vehicle to join the merriments. The scene then moves to a vivacious bar where Hector, what's more, his gathering revel in the organization of young ladies. Oscar anyway feels awkward. Also, communicates his craving to get back. Hector then proposes taking Oscar to witness an underground battle later, which provokes his curiosity. Sooner or later, the bunch is engaged in watching an underground live battle with wagers put on the result. The official declares an enticing award of $10,000 for any individual who can overcome their hero warrior, known as the Authority. Oscar, enlivened by his ongoing combative techniques, chooses to enter the ring, a lot to his siblings' shock. Utilizing the battling strategies he gained from Brian, Oscar quickly routs the Authority. Amazing everybody, he asserts the award cash and with recently discovered certainty, is no more threatened by Hector's partners. Unbeknownst to them, an observer in the swarm records the battle and transfers it to the web. In the meantime, in Orange District, California, Pero, a criminal legal counselor, gotten a crisis call and is sent the video of Oscar's underground battle. Pero is taken stomach muscle by what he sees and promptly contacts his supervisor, the criminal head boss Bright Kilbane. In spite of the fact that Bright is imprisoned, he actually uses extensive power inside the jail. Pero presents the video of Oscar's battle to Radiant, who is similarly astounded. He then, at that point, trains Prue to find the contender and begin researching the personality of Brian, whom they suspect may be Oscar's teacher. There has all the earmarks of being an association between Brian and their criminal venture, and Oscar's battling strategy intently looks like Brian's unmistakable style. Right away, Pero contacts their contract killers in Mexico, entrusting them with the mission of finding and dispensing with Brian. In the following scene, Oscar, actually looking for open doors for underground battles, advances toward a neighborhood battle club and approaches the assistant, Marisol. He asks about getting a participation, anxious to keep testing his newly discovered abilities anyway to his failure. Marisol illuminates him that club participations are simply accessible to people matured 18 and more, seasoned blue. Yet, not without beguile, Oscar plays with Marisol and praises her looks previously. Leaving the club following this, Oscar, joined by his sibling Hector and his gathering, visits Brian's home. They entreat Brian to continue Oscar's preparation and, surprisingly, venture to such an extreme as to offer a significant amount of cash in trade for his administrations. Brian, anyway, stays steadfast in his choice to decline their proposition. Pressures rise when Hector endeavors to force Brian by shaking a gun, yet Brian quickly counters by drawing his own weapon and requesting them to leave his property. Not prior to proposing, Oscar avoid his sibling. Following this, the two siblings, Oscar and Hector, got back to the battle club that had before denied Oscar participation because of his age. Hector continues to sign the essential gatekeeper papers, getting Oscar's confirmation as a club part. During this time, Marisol perceives Oscar as the contender who crushed the gatherer in the underground match, and even offers the video film of the battle with him as they speak. Two new people, the Gonzalez siblings, enter the club and start interrogating Oscar regarding his coach Brian. Before Oscar can answer, Hector intercedes and asks about the character of the rookies. The Gonzalez siblings at first profess to be the proprietors of their own battle club. However, when Hector communicates question, they unveil their actual goal. They are hunting Brian. Hector, not uncovering any information on Brian's whereabouts, recommends that the Gonzalez siblings leave the club later. The Gonzalez siblings withdraw. Hector trusts in Oscar, making sense of the valid nature of the twin siblings as hired gunmen with the aim to hurt Brian. Hearing this, Oscar demands illuminating Brian about the peril he faces and inquires Marisol to go with them. Not long from now, there after the gathering shows up external Brian's home, and Marisol transfers Oscar's demand for a discussion. Brian concurs. Also, Oscar continues to illuminate him about the Gonzalez siblings and their interest of his life. Perceiving the gravity of the circumstance, Brian urges everybody to go into his home speedily, as he thinks that the Gonzalez siblings could have been following them and could represent an inevitable danger. Brian's words end up to be valid, and the Gonzalez siblings open fire at them, killing two of Hector's companions. Luckily, Hector, Brian, Oscar, and Marisol figured out how to look for asylum inside Brian's impenetrable home, simply in the last possible second subsequent to losing his gathering. Individuals Hector coordinates his indignation and pain at Brian, considering him liable for the passing of his companions. He then, at that point, requests a clarification for why the assassins were after him here. Brian hesitantly uncovers his past as a police official who had effectively secured the famous medication ruler Radiant Kilbane quite a long while prior. After Radiant's capture, Brian had been living secretly in the region, expecting to stay past the compass of cartel individuals chasing vengeance. Anyway, he stays confused as to how the Gonzalez siblings found his area. Right then Marisol proposes that it very well may be because of the underground battle Oscar partook in, which was hence transferred to the web. Brian, irate at Oscar's non-compliance, exits the house, yet not previously teaching Hector to pass by the window. In no time flat next, Brian is outside the house, taking cover behind certain shrubberies, pointing his crossbow at one of the Gonzalez siblings. Following Brian's guidelines, Hector strolls past the window, redirecting the consideration of the siblings, immediately jumping all over this chance. Brian discharges the crossbow bolt, killing one of the Gonzalez siblings, unbeknownst to the demise of his sibling. The other one, driven by a wrathful assurance, approaches Brian's home and starts pouring gas over it and proposing to set it burning anyway before he can do his arrangement. Brian faces him, prompting a furious showdown between the two. After a warmed fight, Brian acquires the high ground and presses the leftover Gonzalez siblings for data about their manager. Deplorably, the obstinate assassin denies to uncover any subtleties, and in a last, frantic demonstration touches off himself, surrendering to the blazes and taking his privileged insights with him. Next, Brian enters the house and exhorts Oscar and the others to empty as quickly as conceivable. He suspects that the Gonzalez siblings may have called for fortifications, and an inescapable danger could be not too far off. Brian then,